Somewhere inside a secure briefing room in Washington, a phone rings. On the other end is Jerusalem. The message is short, urgent, and unlike anything American officials have heard in months. Israel has intelligence that Iran has a new plan, a plan to kill the President of the United States. Within hours, that warning would ripple through the White House, the Pentagon, and eventually the entire world. This is the story of how Israel warned the U.S. at the last second and how Donald Trump responded to being told he was now Iran's #1 target. It starts with a war that never really ended. Weeks earlier, a fragile ceasefire had been holding between the United States, Israel, and Iran. It was never solid. Strikes continued in the shadows, shipping lanes stayed tense, and inside Iran, something else was happening that would change everything. The supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, had been killed at the start of the war. His funeral stretched on for days. Crowds filled the streets of Tehran, mourning a man who had ruled for decades. But mourning was not all they were doing. Chants broke out across the funeral processions. Not just grief, not just anger. Calls for blood. Reports from the scene describe banners carried through the crowd. One read simply, "We will kill Trump." It was not a metaphor. It was not an isolated voice in the crowd. It was a message broadcast to the world from a nation in mourning and a nation enraged. For years, Iran had promised revenge against the man they blamed for a single moment in January 2020. That was the strike that killed General Qasem Soleimani, commander of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps' Quds Force. Trump ordered it. Soleimani died. And Iran never forgot. Since that day, U.S. officials have disclosed multiple plots linked to Iran, targeting Trump and former senior American officials. In November 2024, the Justice Department charged an Iranian-linked operative with directing a murder-for-hire scheme against the then-president-elect. In March of 2026, a federal jury convicted a Pakistani national, allegedly tied to Iran's Revolutionary Guard, for participating in a separate conspiracy targeting Trump and other senior officials. These were not rumors. These were court cases, convictions, documented plots. But what came next was different. According to a Wall Street Journal report and confirmed separately by sources speaking to CNN, Israel recently passed a new and specific piece of intelligence to the United States. Iran, they said, had devised a fresh plan to assassinate President Trump. This wasn't the general chatter American intelligence had already been quietly tracking for weeks. Sources told CNN the U.S. had picked up what one described as a steady drumbeat of intelligence about possible plans against Trump's life. But the Israeli warning was different. It was new, and it concerned something specific. A named plot, a live threat. Not background noise, but a signal flare. One source said the warning came in that same week, delivered directly and urgently. Another detail stood out. Two sources familiar with the matter told CNN the United States had not vetted this intelligence themselves. They hadn't even been tracking it before Israel raised the alarm. In other words, this wasn't confirmation of something Washington already suspected. This was Israel handing the U.S. an entirely new piece of the puzzle when they hadn't seen coming. Naturally, the question everyone in Washington started asking was simple. Why now? Some American officials, speaking anonymously, offered a more cautious read. They suggested the timing of the Israeli warning may not have been random. At the exact moment this intelligence surfaced, Trump was weighing whether to escalate American military action against Iran even further. Was Israel raising a genuine alarm? Or was Israel trying to tip the scales of Trump's decision? Inside the intelligence community, skepticism toward Israeli reporting is not new. One source told CNN as much directly. Some officials, they said, are always a little cautious when intelligence arrives from Israel, given Jerusalem's own strategic interests in how far the war goes. That skepticism matters here, because the relationship between Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had grown complicated in recent weeks. Netanyahu wanted the fight against Iran to continue, to finish objectives he believed were unresolved. Trump, on the other hand, appeared to be searching for an off-ramp, worried about what a prolonged war could do to the global economy. The two men had reportedly clashed over Israeli military action in Lebanon, a disagreement that only complicated an already fragile diplomatic effort. Despite the friction, the two leaders spoke by phone. According to Netanyahu's office, they agreed to continue coordination between their countries. Trump reportedly briefed Netanyahu on recent American activity in the Persian Gulf. Netanyahu, for his part, was said to be planning a visit to Washington in the near future. So whatever tension existed behind closed doors, in public the alliance held. But the shadow of that assassination warning didn't go away. If anything, it grew louder. When reporters asked Trump directly about the threats against his life, he didn't dodge the question. He leaned into it. Standing in Ankara, Turkey, at a NATO summit, Trump addressed the danger head-on. He said Iran wants to take out the U.S. leader, meaning him. He said he had seen that morning he was on every single one of their lists. He said he had been lucky so far, but that luck might not last very long. He called the people behind these threats evil and sick, and said the danger had to be cut out early, like a cancer. It was a striking moment. A sitting president standing on foreign soil, openly acknowledging that a hostile nation was actively plotting to end his life. And there was more. Trump later revealed he had learned of a new list, one that reportedly ranked him as Iran's very top assassination target. It wasn't clear if he was referring to the same Israeli intelligence or something separate entirely. Either way, the message was the same. Trump was not just aware of the threat, he was living inside it. Then came a detail that made the story even more real. Reports emerged that Trump had left Turkey aboard an older version of Air Force One rather than the newly renovated jet that had originally flown him there, a jet that had been donated by Qatar. According to the New York Times, this switch was made at the recommendation of the U.S. Secret Service as a security precaution. Sources briefed on the matter stressed it wasn't triggered by one specific concrete threat. It was caution, layered on top of caution. But Trump, when asked directly whether fears of an assassination plot were behind the switch, pushed back on the idea. He said the newer plane was simply flying to Europe, to one of the larger U.S. military bases, so that American soldiers stationed there could see it up close. He called the aircraft truly magnificent. Still, in the same breath, he acknowledged something heavier. He said the life of a president is very dangerous. Then, almost as an aside, he added that maybe someone should have told him that years ago. Maybe, he joked, he wouldn't have run for office at all. It was a rare moment of dark humor from a man now facing what intelligence agencies were calling one of the most serious assassination threats of his presidency. Meanwhile, inside the intelligence community, the picture was expanding, not narrowing. CNN reported that U.S. intelligence agencies are actively monitoring several individuals who have discussed carrying out attacks on current and former senior American officials. Not one lone actor, several. Some U.S. officials cautioned that not every person being monitored has moved from talk to action. Discussion is not the same as an operational plot, but the fact that multiple threads were being tracked at once painted a picture of an environment thick with danger, chatter, and unresolved threats. At the same time, U.S. intelligence had reportedly been concerned for some time that Iran might target not just Trump, but a number of other current and former senior officials as well. This wasn't a single-target operation in the eyes of American intelligence. It was part of a broader pattern of retaliation that Iran had been quietly building since Soleimani's death. So where does that leave things right now? As of the most recent reporting, the specific details of the plot Israel warned about were still not entirely clear. The White House, when asked directly for comment, pointed reporters back to Trump's own remarks in Ankara, rather than confirming new details. Israel's embassy in Washington declined to comment. Iran's mission to the United Nations did not respond to requests for comment either. In other words, nobody involved is speaking on the record about exactly what this plot entails, who is behind it inside Iran, or how close it may have come to execution. What we do know is this: the warning was real enough that it reached the desks of senior U.S. officials. Real enough that CNN and the Wall Street Journal and multiple other outlets independently confirmed it happened. Real enough that Trump himself, standing in front of cameras, chose to acknowledge it rather than deny it. And it landed at an extraordinarily sensitive moment. A ceasefire under strain, a funeral turned into a rallying cry for revenge, a president openly admitting he may be Iran's top target, and an ally, Israel, delivering a warning that some in Washington view with genuine alarm, and others view with quiet suspicion about its true purpose. Whether this was a life-saving tip from a close ally or a strategic nudge meant to push Trump toward further military action against Tehran may not be something the public ever fully knows. What's certain is this: tensions between Washington and Tehran have not cooled since the ceasefire was signed. If anything, they've hardened. Iranian attacks on commercial shipping have continued. U.S. military strikes have resumed in the region. And now, hanging over all of it, is the shadow of an assassination plot that reached the president's own ears, delivered by Israel at what officials describe as the last possible second. For a country still mourning its supreme leader and a president who has now survived multiple attempts on his life, this moment marks something new. Not just another chapter in a decades-long standoff, but a direct, specific, and deeply personal escalation, one that turns a geopolitical war into something far more immediate. A war where the target isn't just a nation, it's one man standing in front of cameras, calmly telling the world he knows he's on the list, and for now at least, choosing not to look away. But this story did not stand still. In the hours after that warning became public, the ceasefire itself collapsed entirely. On July 8th, Trump declared the truce over, after Iranian forces attacked commercial ships in the Strait of Hormuz for the second day in a row. The United States responded with a fresh wave of strikes, hitting close to 90 Iranian military targets in a single operation. Iran did not stay quiet. Its military launched one-way attack drones at sites across Kuwait, Qatar, and Bahrain, calling it direct retaliation for the American strikes. For the first time since the earlier ceasefire, Tehran openly admitted targeting Qatar. Kuwait's defense ministry confirmed at least one person was injured, though listed as stable after several missiles and drones were intercepted over its territory. Jordan also came under fire, with sirens sounding as its military intercepted missiles launched from Iran, and Iran's Revolutionary Guard claiming it struck a base there that houses American forces. Explosions were reported overnight in the Iranian city of Bushehr, along with the town of Chokadak, according to Iran's own state-linked news agencies. In Washington, the political fallout was immediate. Former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi accused Trump of dragging America back into what she called a dangerous and illegal war with Iran. Markets felt it too. Oil prices spiked and stocks dropped worldwide the moment Trump said the ceasefire was over, before partially steadying, as reports of a lull in fighting emerged the next morning. Then, on July 9th, in the middle of the newest wave of strikes, Iran buried its supreme leader. Khamenei's body was carried through Iraq and then across Iran, before finally being laid to rest in the early hours of July 10th, inside the shrine of Imam Reza in Mashhad. Even as his funeral concluded, the war around it never paused. Behind the scenes, diplomacy quietly continued. A U.S. official told CNN that Washington remains committed to finding a resolution, and that technical talks are still happening. Qatar and Pakistan have stepped into the role of mediators, trying to pull both sides back to the negotiating table after the latest exchange of fire derailed the earlier truce. Iran's foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, worked the phones as well, speaking with counterparts in Pakistan, Turkey, and Oman, warning against what he called further American military adventurism. Meanwhile, Israel's role in all of this remains its own flashpoint. Two Israeli sources told CNN that the Trump administration currently does not want Israel joining the strikes, worried about losing control over how far the conflict spreads. Israel's defense minister pushed back hard against that restraint. He said the Israeli military remains on high alert and ready to resume its own campaign against Iran, even alone, for what would be the third time. The latest wave of U.S. strikes did not stop at military bases. It reached deep into Iran's infrastructure. Reports confirmed strikes on an aerospace facility in Bushehr, port infrastructure in Chabahar, transportation links in Golestan province, and facilities near Iranshar Airport in the country's southeast. Iranian media reported that a firefighter was killed after the airport's operations building and weather station were damaged in the strikes. The strike on Chabahar carried its own weight. It is Iran's only ocean-facing commercial port, a critical logistics hub that sits outside the Persian Gulf entirely. And it had not been hit since the earlier ceasefire took effect. That alone signaled something. Washington wasn't just retaliating anymore. It was targeting the very infrastructure that lets Iran project power and move goods beyond the strait itself. All of this traces back to 3 commercial oil tankers, flagged from the Marshall Islands, Saudi Arabia, and Liberia, that came under attack while transiting the Strait of Hormuz. The U.S. and its Gulf allies blamed Iran directly. Iran's chief negotiator responded with defiance, saying the strait would only reopen under what he called Iranian arrangements, a clear signal that Tehran has no intention of giving up the leverage it has built over one of the most important energy corridors on the planet. And Iran is not facing this fight in isolation. The Gulf states around it are being pulled deeper into the war whether they want it or not. Saudi Arabia has condemned Iran's strikes on its neighbors as flagrant and cowardly violations of sovereignty. The Saudi Crown Prince has reportedly urged Trump directly to keep hitting the Iranians hard. The UAE, which has absorbed more Iranian strikes than almost any other regional state, has moved into closer military coordination with both Washington and Israel, reportedly using Israeli-made Iron Dome interceptors to shoot down incoming Iranian missiles. At the same time, cracks are showing between the Gulf's 2 biggest powers. Saudi Arabia continues pushing for de-escalation and a return to diplomacy. The UAE, by contrast, has signaled it's prepared for this war to drag on for as long as 9 months and has lobbied against any ceasefire that leaves Iran's military capability intact. Qatar, meanwhile, is trying to play peacemaker while simultaneously coming under direct Iranian attack for the first time since the earlier truce. It's a region stretched in every direction at once, some nations pushing to end the fighting, others pushing to finish it, and Iran, isolated but defiant, striking outward in every direction it can reach. Underneath all of this sits a financial system trying to price in chaos in real time. War insurance premiums for ships transiting the Strait of Hormuz are now being calculated hour by hour instead of day by day. Underwriters want pricing locked in just 6 hours before a voyage now, down from the usual full day or 2. Once issued, those policies are only valid for 3 to 7 days before they need to be renegotiated all over again. At the height of the earlier strikes, rates for vessels passing through the strait soared to as much as 10% of a ship's total value, compared to 0.25% or so before the war ever started. That is the kind of number that reshapes global shipping decisions overnight. Energy markets have reacted the same way, with fresh gains priced in every time the risk of prolonged disruption grows. It is a war being fought on the water and in the skies, but it is also being fought in spreadsheets, insurance contracts, and oil futures on trading floors thousands of miles away. And then there's the relationship sitting at the center of almost everything happening in this war, the one between Trump and Netanyahu. On the surface, both leaders keep insisting on unity, on continued coordination between Washington and Jerusalem, but underneath that public messaging, real friction remains. Israeli sources have told CNN that the Trump administration currently does not want Israel joining the newest round of strikes at all, worried about losing control over how far the fighting spreads. Netanyahu, according to those same sources, would very much like to join in. Israel's own defense minister has said the country's military remains on high alert, ready to resume its campaign against Iran independently, even without American involvement, for what would be the third time in this war alone. That tension over how far to go and who gets to decide may end up shaping the next phase of this conflict just as much as anything happening on the battlefield itself. As of the most recent reporting on July 10th, a fragile quiet has settled over the region. Guns have gone silent for now, but nobody involved is calling it peace. It's a pause, a breath, the kind that has preceded every fresh round of escalation in this war so far. And somewhere in that quiet, the warning that started this story, an assassination plot against the President of the United States, is still sitting unresolved, still uninvestigated in public, still unconfirmed in its details, still hanging over a conflict that refuses to end. The ceasefire broke once already. The question now is whether the next one will hold, or whether the next headline out of this war will be even harder to watch than the last. It's worth stepping back and remembering just how unusual this moment really is. Sitting presidents have faced threats before, but rarely has a threat been this public, this specific, and this openly acknowledged by the president himself in real time. Trump has now survived multiple attempts on his life during this same political era, including the 2024 shooting that grazed his ear during a campaign rally. He has spoken about assassination threats more openly than almost any modern president before him. Whether that openness is meant to project strength, or is simply an honest reaction to genuine danger, is something only he can answer. What isn't in question is the scale of what U.S. and allied intelligence agencies are now tracking. Multiple actors, multiple threads, a hostile government that has spent years vowing revenge for a single strike back in 2020, and a region now locked in a cycle of ceasefires that break, wars that resume, and warnings that keep arriving just before the next escalation. If this war has shown anything so far, it's that quiet moments here don't last. They are pauses built on unresolved anger, unresolved threats, and unresolved diplomacy. The next chapter of this story is likely already being written somewhere in Tehran, Washington, or Jerusalem, long before any of us see the headline. For now, all anyone outside those rooms can do is watch. Watch the ceasefires, watch the strikes, watch the funerals, watch the phone calls, watch the warnings that keep arriving at the last possible second. And watch a president who says, plainly, that he knows he's on the list. This is a story still being written, and you'll want to see where it goes next.